Hi, this is Tamara from mooglyblog.com, and in this video I'm going to be demonstrating how to crochet the Pixie Shawlette, which is a free pattern you'll find on mooglyblog.com. Please go to the link in the description. There you will find both right and left-handed video tutorials, as well as a link to the written pattern and all the supplies you need, and any other tutorials referenced here today. To make this pattern, you'll need one ball or skein of Red Heart Crochet, shown here. It's about 239 yards per ball, and we'll use almost all of it. You'll also need a US G hook. This one is by Brittany, and of course your standard crochet accessories like scissors, stitch markers, and a yarn needle. Let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the finished shawlette. Okay, so here is the end where we actually start this shawlette. So let me turn it a little bit right here. We start with just 3 stitches, 3 double crochets, and then we gradually grow all the way as we go on up the shawlette until we get to the end here. We've got our longest row, and then we just turn and make a simple edging. It is a basic 10-row repeat, mostly double crochets with a little bit of mesh here, just a chain 1, skip 1 double crochet mesh. And then, of course, we've got some increases and decreases happening on the sides to create this great asymmetrical shaped shawl. So now let's go ahead and get out our yarn and hook, and let's demonstrate those stitches. When I made my first Pixie Shawlette, I used the Stonehenge colorway of Red Heart Croquette, but today I'm going to be demonstrating in the Calming colorway. As you can see, all the colorways of this yarn have a great sparkle to them, but it feels nice and soft. That said, it is very thin, so we've zoomed in here as much as we can. Hopefully you'll be able to see all of these stitches. What we're going to begin with is a magic circle. I do have a separate tutorial for this linked at the link in the description if you need a better look at this with bigger yarn. Basically, I'm going to wrap the yarn around my forefinger twice, working towards me. Go under both loops, pull the loop that's furthest back under that tail end loop there. Yarn over and pull through and sort of cinch that down nice and tight so that those loops are held together. And then from there, I can start working my stitches. Now, I'm going to work under both the loop that goes around my finger and this tail end every time I make a stitch. Now for the first stitch of this pattern, I like to use the chainless starting double crochet. You can use whatever a double crochet substitute you prefer. If you prefer a chain 3, you can do that, or you can chain 2 and not count it as a stitch if you prefer. That is up to you. I'm going to go ahead and pull this loop up nice and high, put my finger over this loop, yarn over with the loop itself, go into the circle, yarn over, pull that loop up, yarn over again, pull through that loop and behind the loop that I wound around my hook, yarn over again, and pull through those last 2 loops. There we go. It takes a moment, but I do find it worth it. Again, you can use a different double crochet substitute if you prefer. And there is, again, a separate link tutorial for this at the link in the description if you'd like a better look at that stitch. After that, I'm going to work 2 more double crochets into the ring. So I'll yarn over, go right into that ring under both loops again to make my double crochet. So there's 2 double crochets essentially. So here's my third one. We want to have essentially 3 double crochets. However you want to make that first one is fine for round 1 here. Now with those 3 stitches made, I'm going to go ahead and pull my finger out of the magic ring. I'm going to pull that loop up a little bit so I can put my hook down. And normally at this point, when you've worked a magic circle like this, what you would do is take this tail end and close it up nice and tight. However, when we come back around for our edging for this shawlette, we want to be able to work into this magic circle for just a couple more stitches. So instead of closing that up all the way right away, I'm going to take a stitch marker, and let me pop this one right into the magic loop, or that magic ring. I'm going through the ring and I'm catching that tail end in it too. I'm going to go ahead now and pull that ring closed a little bit, not all the way. I want to leave it open, like I said, for working back into later, but I don't want it flopping around here too big either. So just take your time and pull it just a little bit. Oops, bumped my yarn right over. There we go. So that's pretty good. I'll probably just go ahead and leave that there for now with the stitch marker in it to hold it secure. Then I can ignore that for now. Let me find that active loop again. Here we are. and get my hook back in there. All right, so we finished row 1. We've got 3 double crochets and we're ready to make row 2. All right, for row 2, we're going to start with a little bit of a unique stitch, a chainless starting double crochet, 2 together. This is essentially a double crochet 2 together decrease, but I like to start it using my chainless starting double crochet. Again, you can use whichever double crochet substitute you like. When I don't use this stitch, what I like to do instead for myself personally would be to chain 2 and then just double crochet in the next stitch and just sort of work that double crochet as the top of that double crochet 2 together. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate the chainless starting double crochet 2 together now. I'm going to pull my loop up again, just like I did before, yarn over with that loop, go into the first stitch here of the row, under both loops there, yarn over, pull up my loop, yarn over, pull through 2, there we are. I'm going to yarn over again, go to the next stitch of the previous row, so that center one right there. Pull that loop out of the way there so you can see it's going right into the top of the second stitch. Yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through those 2 loops, and then with these 3 loops left on the hook, I'm going to go ahead, yarn over, and pull through all 3 of those loops. So that is our chainless starting double crochet 2 together. And after I make that stitch, I really like to put a stitch marker in it. I just go right under the top 2 loops there. That helps me find the top of that stitch when I come back the other direction. Then I can go ahead and double crochet in the, let's see here, we're on row 2, so actually 3 double crochets in the very last stitch. Now this was the top of our chainless starting double crochet, and I neglected to put a stitch marker in this one, so it's a little bit harder to find, but I'll yarn over. I know that second loop, or the second half of it's right there. So if I can get under that one, there we go. We're in the top of that stitch. So however you made that double crochet, you want to make 3 double crochets into the top of it. So here's 1 and 2 and 3. As you've noticed, I'm sure this yarn is very, very thin. So it helps to really just sort of take your time with each stitch. It really just makes working this sort of pattern that much easier when you're working with thin yarn. And with that, we've finished row 2. We've got 4 stitches, so we're ready to begin row 3. So to begin row 3, I'm going to start again with a chainless starting double crochet, and again, you can make whatever double crochet substitute you prefer. Just, oops, let me try that again. It is a little fiddly, but I do love the look of it. So I'm going to go right into that top of that first stitch, the last one made of the previous row here. There we go. Like so. Make that chainless starting double crochet right there. And then I'm going to make 2 more double crochets in that same stitch. So we finished the previous row with 3 double crochets in the last stitch, and we're starting this row with 3 double crochets in the first stitch. So this is going to be the increasing side of the pattern. We'll be increasing on this edge and decreasing on this edge. It can be really helpful to use 2 different colored stitch markers to help you remember which is which. So I'm going to go ahead and put a stitch marker in the top of this first double crochet, in this case a chainless starting double crochet that I made on this side. And this way I'll know yellow is my increase side and purple is my decrease side. So whatever colors, of course, you want to use, if you want to put one on and just sort of leave it in place permanently rather than moving them up, that's up to you, but I do find that sort of visual cues like this are very helpful. After that, we're just going to double crochet in the next stitch. There we are. And then at this point, we should have 2 stitches left right there. We can see we've got our stitch marker in the last one, so we're right on track. What we're going to do now is double crochet 2 together, because remember, this is our decreasing side. So we started with a double crochet 2 together on the previous row, so now we're going to end with it on this row. So I go into the next stitch, pull up my loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over again, go into that last stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all 3 to finish off row 3. Row 3 now has 5 stitches. So let's go on to row 4. To begin row 4, I'm going to go ahead and pull out this stitch marker so I can use it as I begin this one. So I'll just keep it nearby here. And of course I turn, and row 4 is going to begin and essentially be the same as row 2. We've just got more stitches to work into. We're going to make that same double crochet 2 together decrease to begin. So however you want to begin that, you can make that now over the first 2 stitches. So I'm going to pull up my loop here, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over again, go into the next stitch, pull up my loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and yarn over and pull through all 3. Then I can go ahead and get my stitch marker right in the top of that stitch so that it's easier to find on the way back for the next row. And then I am essentially going to double crochet across until 1 stitch remains. So that'll be our marked stitch here. So I find the next stitch and make a double crochet, like so. Then I find the next stitch and do a double crochet. And then we come to our very last stitch here, the one that we've marked with our yellow stitch marker. So this is our increase side. So in this stitch, we're going to go ahead and work 3 double crochets all into the same stitch there. So there's 1 and 2 and 3. There we have it. And that is the end of row 4. And we've got 6 stitches made here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there is row 4. Next, we're going to make row 5, which is going to be very, very similar to row 3. So let's go ahead and work that one together. Okay, so to begin row 5, I'll go ahead and remove this stitch marker from row 3 here so we can use it again. And I'll turn and get that hook right back in the loop here. There we go. Now, to begin row 5, this is our increase side. We've got our yellow marker here. So we're going to begin with 3 double crochets in that first stitch. And once again, of course, however you want to get that first double crochet in there is ultimately fine and up to you. So I will make my chainless starting double crochet here. There we are, followed by 2 more double crochets right in that very first stitch. So there's 1 and 2. And before I forget, I want to get that stitch marker into that first one that I made. There we are. Sometimes when you're working with thread like this, it's a little bit easier to lose track of, the parts of the stitch. It's just a little lacier and looks a little less familiar, so these stitch markers can be particularly helpful. Then, since this is our increase row, we began with the increase, we're going to work across until we've got 2 stitches left, because that's where we know we need a decrease. So we just double crochet in each stitch across. So there's 1, 2, 3, and then we need to take a look because I know we're getting close, and yep, there's only 2 stitches left. So I'll pull up a little bit more yarn here. There we go. And then we are going to double crochet 2 together over these last 2 stitches. So we yarn over and go into the next stitch, pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2, yarn over, go into the final stitch here, our marked one. There we are. Pull up our loop, yarn over and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all 3. So that's row 5. And at the end of row 5, you'll have 7 stitches. So as you can see, with each row, we're increasing by 1 stitch by adding 2 stitches on this end and taking a stitch away on this end. And of course, when we turn, we've got our increases and our decreases will maintain. We've got our different directions, how we begin and end those rows, and we've got our stitch markers to help us remember. So for rows 6 and 7, we're just going to repeat rows 4 and 5 again. And then for row 8, you repeat row 4 again. And then we're going to finally put in those mesh rows. So I'm just going to go ahead and make one more row 4 repeat, and then I'll demonstrate row 9 for you. Okay, so for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and call this row 8. It's essentially the same, where we began with a decrease and ended with 3 double crochets in the last stitch. So for row 9, and every row 9 repeat, what we're going to do is start with a double crochet in that first stitch again. So however you want to make that, I'm going to go ahead and make my chainless starting double crochet here. And then normally, since this is the first stitch of a row that begins with an increase, we're on our increase side here as we begin, you would have 2 more double crochets in here. But because this is our mesh row, instead, we're going to have a chain 1 and then just 1 more double crochet back in that first stitch. So with that finished, I want to make sure to get that stitch marker back in that very first double crochet there, like so. And then we're ready to work on across the row. So essentially the repeat is this: chain 1, skip the next stitch, and get centered up here, chain 1 and skip the next stitch, and then double crochet in the stitch after that. Then do it again. Chain 1, skip the next stitch, and double crochet in the stitch after that. And you're going to repeat that on across until only 3 stitches are left in the previous row. Now, because we're on our tiny little version here, that's all we have left. So we're going to go ahead and chain 1, and then skip that next stitch there and work a double crochet 2 together in the last 2 stitches. So like that, go in that very last one, and make our decrease. So that is essentially how you work all the row 9 repeats. For the row 10 repeats, let's make that together too. Okay, so row 10 is essentially a row of solid double crochet worked in between 2 rows of mesh. So we're going to go ahead and get our stitch marker out here so we can use it again, and turn, and then we're beginning on our decrease side. So what we need to do is get our first half of our decrease here, again, however you want to make that. I'm going to make my chainless starting double crochet here, but of course stop when I've got 2 loops left on the hook. And then to finish this stitch, I'm going to yarn over and go into the chain space here, the chain 1 space in between the last stitch and the other double crochet before it here. So I've got my 3 loops left on my hook, yarn over, and pull through all 3. So our double crochet 2 together decrease for row 10 is worked into the first stitch there and in that chain space. Then we simply double crochet in each stitch and chain space on across till we get to that very last stitch. So we've made our decrease into that chain space, so we want to come right over here to this double crochet for our next one. Work a double crochet there. Oops, almost forgot to get my stitch marker back in there. Get that in the top of our decrease there. Make sure that side is marked. There we go. So again, just double crochet in each chain space and in each stitch until 1 stitch remains. Just take your time. Make sure you go around each chain space and each stitch. And then, let's see, we're almost there. We've got this double crochet. Don't forget, you've got a chain space there where we sort of worked that increase there. Don't want to miss that one. Oops. There we go. And then finally, we are at the final stitch. So since it's our increase side, we're going to have 3 double crochets right in that final stitch. Like so, 1, 2, and 3. After that, it's time for row 11, which is our next mesh row, but it's worked exactly the same as row 9. And of course, at that point, we're working into double crochet, so no changes there. Row 12 is just like row 10. We're going to be working a row of solid double crochets into a mesh row. I've already demonstrated that. Row 13 is then we're back to a row 5 repeat down here, where we begin with 3, it would actually be on this side, row 5, 3 double crochets, double crochet across until you decrease at the end. Basically, we've made all the rows of this repeat right now. The repeat itself is rows 4 through 13, but again, these are all the rows we've made. Rows 4 and 5 are just the back and forth. Rows 9 and 10 are just the mesh, followed by a row of solid double crochet. You know how to make all these rows now. So you just keep making those repeats until you've worked 73 rows total. That is enough to use almost all of 1 ball of Red Heart Croquette. It leaves just enough for the border. However, if you wanted to make a larger shawl, then you could definitely keep going. You'll need more balls of yarn, obviously, but you can just keep making that 10-row repeat over and over and over again until you have the size of shawl you want. And indeed, you don't even have to stop on that particular row where I stopped it. That's just where I stopped it. It made it a nice one skein pattern, you could stop on whichever of the rows of the pattern that you want to end on before you are ready to start your edging. So now let's go ahead and demonstrate that edging. Okay, so when you have made all 73 rows, or however many you decided, of your shawlette, then it's time to begin the edging. What we're going to do is start with a chain 1 and turn and work back across the previous row with a simple row of single crochet. So we just single crochet in each stitch across the previous row until we have 1 stitch remaining. Obviously, if you're making a full-size shawl or whatever size shawl, it's going to take a little bit longer than this one. Although I suppose this one might be another good one for the Barbie collection here. We'll work our way across here until we've got that 1 stitch remaining. Let's see, we're almost there. Alrighty, got 1 more to go. Okay, so we've come to the last stitch of our last row there. So what we want to do now is work a single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet right into that stitch. So that's our marked stitch, so we'll just go right there with 1 single crochet, chain 1, and right back in that stitch. And of course now we can go ahead and take that stitch marker out. We are done with it. Then we are going to continue to work along this long line right here back towards our initial magic ring or magic circle here. So rather than crocheting into the sides of these stitches, which is how edgings are most typically done, I like to do something a little bit different for this one. What we're going to do is chain 2, 1, 2, and then we're going to single crochet in the top of the next row. So we're going to skip over this whole body of the stitch here. What we want to come down and look for, as you can see, right where that stitch was worked into this row down here, right at the top of that stitch, that's where we're going to put our hook, right back in the exact same space that stitch was worked. And that's where we're going to put a single crochet, like so. Then we do it again. Chain 2, 1, 2, jump down to the top of the next row, single crochet in there. Chain 2, jump on down to the top of the next row. Take your time, kind of pull apart your stitches there. It's a good opportunity to really learn how your stitches come together if you haven't taken the time to look at it that closely before. But just take your time working right down along. And this way you avoid having to decide whether you want to work around the stitch or into the stitch, getting those sort of uneven lines. Since this is a color changing yarn, you will definitely be working into some stitches of other colors, and this prevents a lot of that odd color bleed that can be a problem too. And I think it just creates a really nice line. We'll take a look at the finished one here again in a minute, but you can see it creates a really nice smooth edging line around the shawl. So since we've got our tiny little sample here, we are almost at the bottom. So we can demo that here in just a moment. Oops, I think I went too far. I did. There we go. And that's another thing. If you find that your chain stitches are a little too tight and maybe this is pulling a little bit more, you can either work on making those chain stitches a little looser or even add an extra chain in between if needed, just to get that to lay really nicely. Okay, so here we are almost at that end. I'm going to chain 2. Looks like I've got 1 more here to work into. And with that, I have worked all the way along this edge until I've gotten right here to the top of that last row where we've got our magic circle in the stitch marker. So to finish this particular part of the edging off, I'm going to chain 2 again, and then I'm going to come right down here and get this all untwisted. It's been dangling and twisting a little bit, so I just want to get that straightened out again so that it sort of makes sense to work into here. There we go. So now I am going to go right into that open magic circle there, and in that magic circle I'm going to make my single crochet, chain 1, single crochet. So there's a single crochet, chain 1, and single crochet right back into that magic circle. And I want to make sure again to go around that loop as well as the tail. Now that I've done that, I can go ahead and take that stitch marker out, set it aside. There we are. And now I'm going to stabilize it with this hand so you won't really see it happening, because if I just pull like this, it's going to get all wobbly and weird. But if I pinch down on that so I can sort of stabilize it while I pull on this tail end here, I can feel it closing up. I can feel when it's tight. And you can see, there we go. It's all nice and closed up. We've worked in there. We're going to be able to work along this edge with a nice closed magic circle, but we didn't want to do that until this point because it would have been nearly impossible to get back in there with the hook. So now, when we're all done, we'll just go ahead, get it separated from the other one here. These little threads can be a little fiddly. There we go. And then I'll just weave that in at the end. Oh, good grief. There we go. It wants to be worked into the rest of the shawl. There we go. All right, now we can go ahead and work along this edge the exact same way that we worked along this edge. We'll chain 2, 1, 2, and skip up to the top there of this row and find where that next row was worked into it. Put our hook there and make a single crochet and just keep working on across. Chain 2, jump up to the top of the next row, and single crochet right in there. So that is basically how you make the edging. You'd continue doing that all the way around until you get back up here to we had that first single crochet I made in the top of that very first stitch there. Remember when we began our edging? So right back in that stitch, you'd make another single crochet, chain 1, and join to the first single crochet made to have a finished edging. Okay, so here we have another look at the finished shawl, and you can see it really is just a 10-row repeat, but all the rows are basically that row of 4 and 5 repeat where we're just decreasing on one edge and increasing on the other, and then we've got the row of mesh, which is just a repeat of row 9, and the row afterwards where we're just having to work into those chain spaces. Otherwise, it's the same as all the others. So you just keep repeating those rows. An easy way to count them rather than worrying about rows 4 through 13 or whatever it is as you're counting them, I just like to always make sure I have 7 rows, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, before I get to another row of mesh, solid, and mesh. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, mesh, solid, mesh. And then of course a row to finish it off, and another row after that I think just makes it look really nice. And then of course I worked all the way around the edge for that edging. So down here you can see I was in that same color, but if I pull this around here a little bit, you can see when I was working the different color along the edge there, by sort of doing the chain 2 single crochet, it creates a really nice straight line without a lot of color bleed into the different color sections. I think it just looks really sharp, but of course you can use whichever edging you like and personalize it for you. So I hope you'll give this pattern a try. Again, it just uses 1 ball of Red Heart Croquette, or you can keep adding more rows and add more balls of yarn. Make it as big as you like. With just 1 ball, the finished dimensions of mine were 39 inches if I were to lay it out all the way this way, 20 inches from here to here, so basically along that last row, and 36.5 inches if you drew a straight line from this point to this point. There is a schematic to show that on the finished pattern, so you can take a look at that when you lay yours out. For blocking, all I did was get mine wet, squeeze out the excess water, and lay it flat to dry. I didn't pin it and stretch it or anything like that. So I think this one will be a really easy one to take care of, especially since this yarn has such great cotton content. So again, I hope this video has helped you make your own Pixie Shawlette. I hope you give it a try. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Thanks so much for watching.